For decades, the true scale of Soviet underwater might remained shrouded in mystery. After 1946, the USSR wasn't just building submarines, they were methodically forging a massive nuclear deterrent, deeply sequestered beneath the oceans. Discovered the untold story of a fleet so structurally sound and technologically advanced that it possessed the power to reshape the Cold War's strategic calculus, holding the chilling capability to unilaterally terminate human civilization if diplomatic deterrence ultimately failed. Imagine the sound of that failure. It isn't the scream of a siren or the roar of a jet engine. It is the groan of high-yield steel under the crushing weight of the Atlantic Ocean. It is the hiss of a welding torch in a shipyard in Severodvinsk, burning at temperatures hot enough to melt skin, fusing together a machine designed for one specific purpose: the end of the world. You are standing on the precipice of the Cold War, but the battleground isn't Berlin or the Fulda Gap. It is the pitch-black, freezing water 300 meters below the surface, where the pressure is enough to turn a human body into pulp in a fraction of a second. This is where the Soviet Union decided to stake its survival. To understand why this specific fleet was built, and to understand the deadly secret welded into the hull of every single vessel, you have to go back to the fracture point. It is 1946. The Second World War is over, but the architecture of global military dominance is dictated by one terrified reality: the unilateral atomic monopoly held by the United States. For a brief moment, Washington holds the keys to the apocalypse, but strategic planners in the Pentagon know this supremacy is built on a fragile scientific advantage that is inherently fleeting. They know the clock is ticking. In the ashes of 1946, there is a prevailing assumption that the sheer destructive power of atomic weaponry will force a new international order, perhaps governed by treaties. This hope is written down in the Acheson-Lilienthal Report, a document proposing cooperative international mechanisms to prevent an arms race. It sounds idealistic, it sounds safe, but the diplomatic realities of the emerging Cold War are rapidly dismantling these frameworks. Deep within the Truman administration, high-level discourse reveals profound, existential anxieties. President Harry S. Truman looks at the Russian diplomatic position on June 19, 1946, and realizes something terrifying. If he accepts the Soviet proposal, the United States loses its strategic leverage, leaving nothing but Soviet promises. The fear is palpable. It is written in correspondence to Bernard Baruch. American leadership realizes that if the Soviet Union launches an atomic armament race, the security gained through American scientific discovery will be irrevocably wiped out. This realization fundamentally alters the trajectory of history. The Soviet Union knows it cannot compete on the surface. They look at the map and see a geometric nightmare. The United States Navy projects global power through immense carrier strike groups. They own the surface of the sea. They rely on surface combatants to secure shipping lanes and project aviation inland. The Soviet Union, conversely, faces severe geographic and industrial constraints that render a symmetric naval challenge mathematically and tactically impossible. They are hemmed in by geographic choke points. The Baltic is a bottleneck. The Black Sea is a cage. The Pacific ports are vulnerable. Contesting the West on the ocean surface is an exercise in futility. So the Soviet naval doctrine undergoes a radical, violent evolution. In the West, the surface fleet is the pride of the Navy, taking priority in prestige and fending. In the Soviet Union, the script is flipped. The submarine fleet is elevated to become the central doctrinal and budgetary element of their entire Navy. This is not a tactical pivot. It is a comprehensive reorganization of the state's military-industrial complex. The financial allocation required to sustain this is staggering. The Soviet submarine programs, specifically the ballistic missile submarines designed for strategic deterrence, rank among the most expensive military procurement programs in the entirety of Soviet history. Think about that cost. In a planned economy where citizens line up for bread and basic consumer goods are scarce, the state is funneling rivers of ruble and resources into the deep ocean. They are doing this to bypass NATO's surface dominance entirely. The goal is to create a massive fleet of ballistic missile submarines, or SSBNs, that provide a survivable, mobile, and continuously hidden second strike capability. The logic is cold and absolute. Even if the Soviet homeland is entirely devastated by a preemptive American nuclear strike, the submerged fleet will survive to deliver a retaliatory blow of equal or greater magnitude. The submarine is transformed from a commerce-raiding nuisance into the ultimate guarantor of state survival. But having the will to build this fleet is one thing, having the engineering capacity to do it is another, and this is where the deadly secret begins to take shape. The realization of this underwater armada requires unprecedented leaps in metallurgical engineering and material science. The defining physical challenge is the pressure hull. It must withstand the crushing, unforgiving hydrostatic pressures of the deep ocean while housing delicate nuclear reactors and massive ballistic missiles. The physics are governed by Barlow's formula. The pressure capability depends on the allowable yield stress of the material, the hull thickness, and the external diameter. To achieve operational depths that can evade Western sonars, you need incredibly thick, high-yield steel. You need to build immense, heavy vessels. And you need to weld them together. In the West, this is a delicate, almost surgical process. American contractors like Electric Boat develop highly specialized manufacturing ecosystems. They build specialized satellite facilities like the one at Quonset Point, Rhode Island. They use modular construction where heavily engineered cylinders are manufactured independently in controlled environments and then welded together much later. The American approach is precise, modular, and financially risk-averse. They prioritize silence and refinement. The Soviet Union does not have the luxury of time or specialized clean rooms for every single joint. They need numbers, they need tonnage, and they need it now. The deadly secret of the Soviet submarine fleet lies in the brutal, pragmatic, and highly efficient construction methodologies utilized to forge their pressure hulls. A critical revelation regarding Soviet manufacturing processes is that for the vast majority of their sprawling, steel-hulled fleet, the actual hull is welded in a regular atmosphere. In the world of advanced naval architecture, this sounds like madness. Welding the extremely thick, high-yield steel required for deep-diving pressure hulls traditionally demands rigorous environmental controls. If you let the atmosphere touch the molten metal, you invite disaster. Atmospheric contamination of the weld pool by hydrogen, oxygen, or nitrogen can lead to microscopic porosity. It causes hydrogen embrittlement. It leads to catastrophic stress corrosion cracking at extreme depths. Western shipyards mitigate this with specialized shielding gas chambers or meticulously maintained clean room conditions, but the Soviets cheat the system. By perfecting advanced metallurgical techniques that allow them to weld massive, thick steel pressure hulls in standard shipyard atmospheric conditions, Soviet engineers effectively bypass the severe logistical and temporal bottlenecks that would otherwise cripple their production rates. This is metallurgical pragmatism at its finest. It allows for the rapid serialization of submarines at vast, open-air inland and coastal shipyards. They are welding these monsters in the open air. They are building them faster than the West believes is physically possible. The ability to weld these vast, monolithic sections of thick steel in regular atmospheric conditions without compromising the structural integrity of the joints enables the fielding of a massive fleet at a pace that deeply alarms Western defense observers. While the Americans are building Ferraris, refined, quiet, mechanically reliable, the Soviets are building tanks. The Soviet monolithic regular atmosphere welding approach prioritizes rugged survivability, sheer scale, and raw numbers. This distinct metallurgical divergence results in two vastly different underwater fleets. But the Soviet approach isn't just about cutting corners. It is about building a specific type of weapon for a specific type of war. As the 1950s bleed into the 1960s, the strategic landscape shifts. The massive nuclear deterrent of the US is running its course. The Soviets are hiding in the deep, and they are preparing to introduce a vessel that will take this brutalist engineering to its absolute, terrifying logical conclusion. They are designing a ship that doesn't just hide in the ocean, but actively fights the geography of the planet itself. They are designing the Typhoon, and the secret welded into its tail is even more shocking than the hull itself.
It is the late 1970s. You were looking at a grainy satellite photograph of a shipyard in Severodvinsk. In the center of the frame sits a Leviathan. NATO designates it the Typhoon class. It is the largest submarine ever built, a staggering 48,000 tons of submerged displacement. That is not a ship. That is an underwater cathedral of steel. To the untrained eye, it looks like a monster of excess. But to a structural engineer analyzing the grainy images, one detail stands out. It's in the tail. There is a vertical structure that looks like a rudder. It has a split in it. For years, Western analysts assumed this was a complex, articulated control surface, a moving part designed to help steer this behemoth through the water. But then, high-resolution photography reveals the truth. The split doesn't move. The white waterline marker runs directly underneath it, and even when the primary rudder turns, this massive section remains frozen in place. It isn't a rudder. It is a blade. The Soviet engineers have welded a solid 3-meter-high reinforcement directly to the pressure hull. This is the second deadly secret. They didn't build this ship just to swim. They built it to fight the ice. The Typhoon is designed to park itself beneath the solid, shifting pack of the Arctic Ocean, the most hostile environment on Earth. To launch its missiles, it doesn't need to find open water. It is designed to float upward and smash its way through 3 meters of solid ice. Imagine the physics of that violence, an 18,000-ton steel vessel rising from the dark, accelerating upward and ramming its conning tower and tail into a frozen ceiling. The rudder is actually a kinetic shock absorber, welded immovably to the hull to transfer the catastrophic force of the impact away from the delicate hydraulic steering mechanisms and into the massive skeletal frame. While American submarines are hiding in the deep Atlantic, trying to be quiet, the Typhoon is designed to turn the Arctic ice cap into a fortress. It can sit there, silent and invisible, shielded from American sonar by the grinding noise of the shifting ice pack, waiting for the order to end the world. This capability changes everything. It means the Soviet Union has achieved the holy grail of nuclear strategy, a completely secure second strike capability. Meanwhile, in Washington, the mood is shifting from confidence to a cold, sweating panic. Back in the late 1940s, the American plan was simple: massive retaliation. If the Soviets stepped out of line in Europe, the United States would launch everything. The assumption was that the US could wipe the Soviet Union off the map, and the Soviets could do nothing about it. But the submarine changed the math. By early 1952, classified intelligence assessments land on the desks of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They contain a terrifying realization. A new generation of weaponry, the thermonuclear bomb, is about to be tested. The yield is projected to be 1,000 times greater than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But here is the catch. If the Soviets have these weapons, and they have the submarines to deliver them, victory becomes a suicide pact. The strategic paralysis is total. Planners in the Pentagon realize that their primary weapon, the threat of massive nuclear annihilation, is rapidly running its course. If the U.S. launches a strike, the Soviet land bases might vaporize. But the submarines? The submarines are safe beneath the ice. They will survive, and they will fire back. Suddenly, the President of the United States is holding a gun that he can never fire. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, a man known for his brinksmanship, bitterly complains to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He says there is absolutely no use in having a massive arsenal of nuclear material if there is never going to be a workable formula for actually using it. The submarine fleet has neutralized the American advantage. This isn't just a military problem, it is a psychological crisis. The concept of total victory is rendered obsolete. Military planning has to shape up to meet grim conditions where traditional allies like the United Kingdom or West Germany might completely disappear in the opening minutes of a war. The U.S. is forced to accept that it must now prepare to fight defensive wars that do not involve the total defeat of the enemy.
Think about that for a second. The United States, the greatest industrial power in history, has to accept that it cannot win a total war. The Soviet submarine fleet has forced a stalemate. But the Soviets aren't done. While the Typhoon is securing the strategic deterrent, the Soviet Navy is pouring billions of rubles into a different kind of nightmare, the hunter-killer.
For decades, the U.S. Navy relied on one simple fact. Soviet submarines were loud. They were essentially underwater tractors. You could hear them coming from miles away. Their reactor coolant pumps rattled. Their gears ground together. Their propellers cavitated, creating bubbles that collapsed with a distinct popping sound. American sonar operators sat in their quiet, air-conditioned control rooms, tracking Soviet subs like they were monitoring traffic. It was a comfortable advantage. It was a happy time. Then came the Akula. The Project 971 Shuka B, known to NATO as the Akula class, is the result of the single most expensive military procurement program in Soviet history. The Soviets realized that brute force wasn't enough for hunting. They needed silence, and to get it, they stole. Through a complex web of espionage and industrial theft, the Soviet Union acquired advanced computer-aided milling techniques from the West, specifically from Japan and Norway. These machines allowed them to mill propellers with a precision previously thought impossible for Soviet heavy industry. They applied superior sound dampening anechoic coatings to the hulls. They refined the hydrodynamics until the water flowed over the steel like oil.
The result is a shockwave that hits the Western defense establishment with the force of a torpedo. The Akula is quiet, terrifyingly quiet. The passive sonar equation, which the U.S. Navy has used to hunt Soviet subs for 30 years, suddenly stops working in their favor. The signal excess, the difference between the noise the sub makes and the background noise of the ocean, drops to near zero. In a moment of stunning candor, U.S. naval officials are forced to admit the truth. During a heated budgetary hearing, trying to justify the cost of the new American Seawolf class, they state it plainly. The Akula is the world's best submarine right now. Read that again. The United States Navy, the masters of the sea, openly admitting that the Soviet Union, a country that can barely feed its own people, a country where cars are a luxury, has built a better machine. It prompts deep, anxious suspicions. How long has this been true? How many Soviet subs have slipped past the SOS US listening nets in the Atlantic? How many are sitting off the coast of New York or Washington right now, completely undetected? The comfortable gap is gone. The ocean is no longer an American lake. It is a jungle. And in this jungle, there is a new apex predator. The acoustic shock forces the U.S. Navy to throw out its defensive playbook. Waiting in the Atlantic is suicide. If the Akulas can slip through the GUIK gap, the line between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK, they can sever the supply lines to Europe. They can sink the aircraft carriers. They can win the war before it even starts. So the U.S. adopts a new high-risk doctrine, forward defense. The order goes out to American submarine commanders. Do not wait for them. Go get them. The U.S. Navy shifts to an aggressive posture, sending its own hunter-killer subs deep into Soviet waters. They are ordered to penetrate the bastions, the heavily defended seas where the Soviet ballistic missile subs hide. The target is the Sea of Okhotsk in the Pacific and the Barents Sea in the Atlantic. These are the most dangerous waters on Earth. They are ringed with Soviet mines, patrolled by Soviet destroyers, and watched by Soviet aircraft dropping sonobuoys. And now, American crews have to sail right into the middle of it. Their mission is twofold. Sink the Soviet boomers, the ballistic missile subs, before they can launch, and bottle up the attack subs before they can break out. It is a game of cat and mouse played with nuclear reactors and high-explosive torpedoes in pitch blackness under crushing pressure. But acoustic parity means the Americans can no longer just listen. They need to know what the Soviets are thinking. They need to know where the subs are going before they even leave the dock. They need intelligence. And since they can't get it from the air, and they can't get it from spies on the ground, They decide to get it from the bottom of the sea. This leads to the most audacious espionage mission of the Cold War, a mission so secret that the crew of the submarine involved doesn't even know what they are doing. Enter the USS Halibut. The USS Halibut is not a pretty ship. By the standards of the 1970s, she is a Frankenstein's monster, a diesel-electric relic from a bygone era that has been sliced open and stitched back together. But Commander Jack McNish doesn't care about aesthetics. He cares about the Batcave. This is a specialized, watertight hangar welded to the submarine's deck, housing a secret that will change the Cold War. The Halibut isn't here to hunt. She is here to burgle. She has been deployed to the Sea of Okhotsk, the most heavily defended Soviet maritime bastion on the planet. This is the Soviet backyard. Above the waves, Soviet destroyers are running patterns. Below the waves, the new silent Akula class is beginning to prowl. But the Halibut dives deeper, hugging the ocean floor, operating in a realm of crushing darkness where no human being is supposed to exist.
The mission is so highly classified that the vast majority of the crew has absolutely no idea what is happening just inches outside their pressure hole. They are told they are on a special engineering test. They are lying in their bunks, listening to the creak of the hull, unaware that they are parking directly on top of the Soviet Union's central nervous system. Inside the Batcave, a small, highly isolated group of technical specialists is operating a piece of technology that looks like science fiction. It is a wire-guided torpedo, but the warhead has been removed. In its place are high-resolution optical cameras and massive spotlight arrays. This is the Fish. It is a deep-sea drone, decades ahead of its time. The Halibut extends the Fish on a tether, piloting it through the black water, searching the silt of the ocean floor. They are looking for a line, a literal line in the sand. And then the grain on the monitor shifts. A black snake appears in the gloom. It is an underwater communication cable. This isn't just any cable. This is the hardline connection between the Soviet naval command centers on the mainland and the massive submarine bases in the Sea of Okhotsk. Every launch order, every deployment schedule, every technical gripe about a broken reactor pump passes through this copper wire.
Now comes the meanwhile moment that defies logic. While Soviet engineers are building the Akula with laser-milled propellers to defeat American sonar, and while they are welding 3-meter-high ice-breaking blades onto the Typhoons to smash the polar cap, they have made a catastrophic assumption about their own backyard. They assume the Sea of Okhotsk is a fortress. They assume no American vessel could ever penetrate this deep, stay this long, and work this precisely. Because of this arrogance, they didn't encrypt the cables. The American divers lock out of the Halibut. In the freezing, crushing depths, tethered to their ship by umbilical cords, they wrap a massive induction coil around the Soviet cable. It's a tap, a recording pod, powered by a miniature nuclear generator designed to sit there for months, silently drinking in the data. When the Americans eventually retrieve the tapes, the intelligence windfall is terrifying. They aren't just hearing codes, they are hearing voices. They are listening to Soviet admirals discussing the mechanical failures of their new ships. They are hearing the exact deployment schedules of the ballistic missile submarines. They are hearing the launch protocols. This intelligence pipeline, known as Operation Ivy Bells, provides the United States with a God's eye view of the Soviet fleet. It helps to partially offset the terrifying technological surprise of the Akula. The U.S. Navy might not be able to hear the new Soviet subs on sonar, but now, thanks to the tap, they know exactly when they are leaving port. But here is the twist. Here is what they didn't tell you in the history books. While the Americans are high-fiving over their espionage coup, the Soviet machine is grinding forward with a relentless industrial momentum that no amount of wiretapping can stop. The intelligence from the tapes reveals something deeper, a structural reality about the Soviet state that is far more dangerous than any single submarine. The U.S. Navy is a maritime force. It fights for control of the sea.
But the Soviet Navy has become something else entirely. It has become a deterrent state. Remember the metallurgical pragmatism, the welding in the open air? The West mocked it. They saw the rough welds and the lack of clean rooms and called it sloppy. But the tapes and the reconnaissance photos reveal the truth. The Soviets aren't welding in the open air because they are stupid. They're doing it because they are building a fleet at a scale that requires industrial brutality.
They are utilizing Barlow's formula, P equals 2 times S times T divided by D, to its absolute limit. They are rolling thick, high-yield steel and welding it in standard atmospheric conditions to bypass the logistical bottlenecks that slow down American shipyards. This allows them to serialize production. They are printing submarines. The financial allocation is staggering. The Soviet submarine program has become the most expensive military procurement in the history of the USSR. They are bankrupting their own economy to build these hulls. Why? Because the doctrine has shifted. The submarine is no longer just a weapon. It is the apex of their strategy. The Soviet Union has accepted that its surface fleet will die in the first hour of World War III. They have accepted that their air force might be grounded. They have accepted that Moscow might be a crater. So they are pouring the entire soul of the nation into the deep ocean. The intelligence from the halibut confirms that the Soviets are building a capability to fight a defensive war which does not involve the total defeat of the enemy. This is the strategic paralysis the Americans feared. The Soviet plan isn't to win a naval battle. It is to survive the end of the world. And the crown jewel of this survival strategy is the Typhoon. The Americans know about the Typhoon. They know it's big, but as the 1980s progress, the true purpose of that ship becomes clear, and it renders the forward defense strategy incredibly dangerous. The U.S. plan is to rush into the bastions and sink the boomers, but the Typhoon is designed to disappear into the geometry of ice. It doesn't just hide under the ice, it integrates with it. That 3-meter solid steel ridge welded to the hull isn't just for surfacing. It allows the Typhoon to hover in the chaotic acoustic environment of the shifting pack. The noise of the ice grinding together masks the sound of the submarine. It is an acoustic cloak of invisibility provided by nature. The U.S. Navy realizes that even with the wiretaps, even with the halibut, even with the superior computers, they cannot guarantee they can find the Typhoon. And if they can't find it, they can't kill it. And if they can't kill it, massive retaliation is a bluff. The turning point has arrived. The game has moved beyond acoustics and into the realm of psychology. The Soviets have built a machine that allows them to hold a gun to the head of civilization from a bunker that no one can breach. But as the Cold War enters its final, fevered decade, the Soviet Union decides to double down. They aren't satisfied with just the Typhoon. They want to close the acoustic gap completely. They want a fleet that isn't just survivable, but invisible in the open ocean. This leads to the final unraveling, the moment when the deadly secret of the welds meets the high-tech betrayal of the century. The Soviets are about to make a leap that shouldn't be possible, and they're going to do it right under the noses of the Americans. The water is about to get much, much darker. It is the mid-1980s. You are standing in a soundproof room in the Pentagon. The air is stale. The mood is funereal. On the table sits a report that effectively admits the United States has lost its most cherished military advantage. For 40 years, the ocean was transparent to the American Navy. They could hear a Soviet submarine sneezing from 50 miles away, but now the ocean has gone dark. The unraveling of American confidence begins with a single word, Akula. The Soviet Union, a nation often caricatured in the West as a rusting giant of heavy industry and poor quality control, has produced a machine of exquisite technological perfection. The Project 971 Shuka B, the Akula, is not just a submarine, it is a ghost. Through highly advanced computer-aided milling techniques and superior sound-dampening anechoic coatings, the Soviets have drastically reduced the source level of their attack vessels.
The strategic shock is palpable. It is severe. It is destabilizing. The comfortable capability gap that American admirals relied on has narrowed to a terrifying, nearly imperceptible degree.
Here is the paradox that Western analysts cannot wrap their heads around. How can a country that struggles to manufacture reliable toasters produce a submarine that is quieter than the best American vessel? The answer lies in the ruthless prioritization of the Soviet state. The submarine fleet is not just a branch of the military, it is the central budgetary element of the entire empire. It is the most expensive military procurement program in the entirety of Soviet history. While Soviet citizens are queuing for basic goods in Moscow, the state is funneling a river of gold into the shipyards of Severodvinsk. They are buying, or stealing, the best technology in the world. They are importing advanced milling machines that allow them to carve propellers with mathematical perfection, eliminating the cavitation noise that used to give them away. The result is a humiliating admission from the U.S. naval establishment. In a desperate attempt to justify the immense cost of the upcoming Seawolf-class submarine, U.S. officials openly admit the terrifying reality. The Akula is the world's best submarine right now.
This isn't just a quote, it is an earthquake. It implies that for an unknown period, a deployed Soviet vessel has surpassed the entirety of the American subfleet in overall capability. It prompts deep, anxious suspicions regarding how long this state of acoustic parity has actually been occurring in the dark depths. The Soviet submarine force has fundamentally evolved from a noisy, easily tracked blunt instrument into a highly stealthy, technologically exquisite apex predator. But the unraveling goes deeper than just technology. It destroys the very concept of American victory. For decades, the United States relied on massive retaliation. The idea was simple. If the Soviets attack, we destroy them. But the Soviet submarine fleet has rendered this doctrine obsolete. The massive nuclear deterrent is rapidly running its course as the principal element of the U.S. arsenal. Planners recognize that a massive retaliatory strike against the Soviet Union would immediately trigger a thermonuclear second strike from their surviving submarine fleet. Because the submarines are virtually unfindable, hidden under the Arctic ice or running silent in the deep Atlantic, any full-scale conflict now guarantees mutual suicide. The United States is forced to conclude that it must be in a position to fight defensive wars, which do not involve the total defeat of the enemy.
Think about the psychological weight of that. The total victory of World War II is impossible. The United States has to accept that in a war, traditional European allied governments like those in the UK or West Germany might completely disappear in the opening salvos. The frustration among civilian leadership is bitter. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles famously complains that there is absolutely no use in having a massive arsenal of nuclear material if there's never going to be a workable formula for utilizing it. The Soviet submarine fleet has paralyzed the American superpower. So, the United States tries to pivot. If they can't win the big war, they will focus on the small ones. This necessitates a fundamental reevaluation of naval strategy. The goal is to engender a massive shift in naval thinking, pivoting away from the apocalyptic open ocean confrontation and steering toward a more subtle, flexible use of naval forces. This is the birth of the Naval Force Capabilities Planning Effort, or NFCPE. The paradox is stark. The Soviet submarine fleet forces the U.S. Navy to become a more flexible, regionally focused force, while relying on the sheer terror of its nuclear arsenal to keep smaller rogue states at bay. The U.S. realizes that while the Soviet Union can deter them, smaller nations cannot. They determine that any biological or nuclear attack on U.S. forces would make a nuclear response almost mandatory. It is a grim consolation prize. We can't nuke Moscow, but we can certainly nuke anyone else. But back in the shipyards, the Soviet machine is still welding, and this is where the deadly secret we started with returns to haunt the West.
The West assumed that high-tech submarines like the Akula would be slow to build. They assumed that the modular, financially risk-averse American method was the only way to build a quality boat. But the Soviets have their metallurgical pragmatism. Remember the welding? The Soviets are still welding massive pressure holes in regular atmospheric conditions. They are bypassing the clean rooms. They are bypassing the environmental controls. This allows them to serialize these high-tech monsters. They aren't just building one perfect prototype, they are building a fleet. The ability to weld these vast, monolithic sections of thick steel in regular atmospheric conditions without compromising structural integrity enables the fielding of a massive fleet at a pace that deeply alarms Western defense observers. It is a triumph of Soviet heavy industry. It is brutal, efficient, and terrifying. While American contractors like Electric Boat are bogged down in meticulous, clean-room modular construction, the Soviet shipyards are churning out hulls that are rugged, survivable, and now, thanks to the Akula upgrades, incredibly quiet. The Soviet Union has effectively created a deterrent state. The submarine fleet is no longer just a navy, it is a sovereign entity. It has its own budget, its own cities, its own industrial base. It is designed to survive the death of the nation that built it.
By the late 1980s, the situation is this. The Soviet economy is collapsing. The political system is rotting from the inside. But the submarine fleet is at its zenith. The Typhoons are patrolling the Arctic, ready to shatter the ice with their 3-meter welded blades. The Akulas are slipping through the GUI gap, invisible to sonar. The halibut is tapping cables, but the intelligence only confirms the nightmare. The Soviet underwater fortress is impenetrable. The Cold War is ending, but not with a bang. It is ending with a standoff. The Soviet Union might fall, but its submarines will not. They are the ultimate insurance policy. They have successfully forced the West to abandon the dream of total victory. But as the Soviet Union begins to crumble in 1991, a new question emerges. What happens to this massive, apocalypse-ready fleet when the country that owns it ceases to exist? What happens to the deadly secrets welded into those hulls when the shipyards go silent? The payoff is coming. The fleet that was built to end the world is about to face its only true enemy, time. And the legacy of those welds, those reactor cores, and those ice-breaking rudders is still sitting in the water today, waiting. The Soviet Union died on December 26, 1991. The flag came down over the Kremlin. The borders were redrawn. The economy shattered into 1,000 pieces. But in the freezing waters of the Arctic, the fleet did not die. The deterrent state that had been welded together in the open air of Severodvinsk outlived the empire that created it. This is the ultimate payoff of the Soviet endeavor. The state itself was fragile. It was built on bad economics and political repression. But the submarine fleet? That was built on physics. That was built on Barlow's formula and the brutal, pragmatic metallurgy that Western engineers mocked right up until the moment they realized it checkmated them. In the chaotic years that followed the collapse, the true scale of the deadly secret became a planetary liability. The West, which had spent trillions trying to hunt these submarines, suddenly found itself spending billions to keep them from sinking. The sheer number of holes, serialized rapidly thanks to those atmospheric welding techniques, meant that the new Russian Federation had inherited an armada it could not afford to maintain, but dared not abandon. You can see the legacy of this today in the submarine graveyards of the Kola Peninsula. For years, rusting hulls of the immense underwater empire sat bobbing in the dark water, their nuclear reactors still hot, their pressure hulls still intact. They were a testament to the metallurgical pragmatism that built them. They were built so thick, so heavy, and so crudely strong that even neglect couldn't kill them immediately. They were the zombies of the Cold War. But look closer at the survivors. The DNA of the Soviet deadly secret didn't just rot in a dock, it evolved.
The Russian Navy of the 21st century is smaller, yes, but the doctrine hasn't changed. The Boré-class and the Yasin-class submarines prowling the Atlantic today are the direct descendants of that metallurgical philosophy. They are still designed with the same core principle, survivability above all else. The terrifying acoustic shock of the Akula wasn't a fluke, it was the new baseline. The United States Navy is still chasing the ghosts of the 1980s. The Seawolf class, built to counter the Soviets, was cut short because the Cold War ended, but the threat didn't. The acoustic advantage the U.S. enjoyed in the 1960s never came back. The ocean remained opaque. And what of the Typhoon, the behemoth with the ice-breaking blade welded to its tail? Most of them were scrapped, cut apart by the very American money that once feared them, in a program called Nun-Lugar. It is one of history's greatest ironies. The United States paid to destroy the very machines that forced it to abandon the doctrine of total victory. But one Typhoon remains, the Dmitry Donskoy. For years it served as a testbed, a floating laboratory for the next generation of horror. It tested the Bulava missile, keeping the secure second strike capability alive well into the new millennium. The welded secrets of its hull, that 3-meter reinforced rudder, the double-pressure hull design, proved that the Soviet engineers were right. They built a machine that could survive the end of the world, and it ended up surviving the end of the Soviet Union instead.
So, why does this matter? Why should you care about the welding techniques of a dead empire? Because it worked. The Soviet submarine fleet accomplished exactly what it was designed to do. It prevented World War III. It didn't prevent it by being nice. It didn't prevent it by diplomacy. It prevented it by creating a strategic paralysis. By welding those massive holes in the open air, by accepting the high costs, and by building a fleet that could hide under the Arctic ice, the Soviet Union forced the United States to blink. They forced the U.S. to accept that it could not win a nuclear war. They forced the U.S. to fight defensive wars which did not involve the total defeat of the enemy. They took the option of a preemptive strike off the table and replaced it with the certainty of mutual annihilation. The deadly secret wasn't just a way to build ships faster, it was a way to freeze history. The cold reality is that we are still living in the world these submarines created. The logic of deterrence that holds global powers in check today, the reason why major powers do not fight direct wars, is anchored in the depths of the ocean. It is anchored in the belief that somewhere, deep in the dark, a machine is listening. A machine that can survive anything you throw at it. A machine that will fire back. The forward defense strategy of the U.S. Navy, the espionage of the USS Halibut, the panic over the Akula, all of it was a reaction to a strategic checkmate delivered by Soviet heavy industry.
In the end, the story of the Soviet submarine fleet isn't about communism or capitalism. It is about the raw, terrifying power of engineering. It is about how a nation, backed into a corner, used metallurgical pragmatism to weld its survival directly into the frame of the planet. Today, if you go to the Arctic, the ice is still shifting, the leads are still opening and closing, the noise of the pack is still deafening, and beneath it, the descendants of the Typhoon are still there. They are silent, they are waiting, and on their hulls the welds are still holding. The atomic monopoly that shattered in 1946 never returned. The transient period of unmatched supremacy is gone forever. It was buried at sea, welded inside a steel tomb that refused to be crushed. The Soviet Union is a memory, but the weapon it forged in the deep remains the ultimate reality check for the human race. As long as those hulls are patrolling, the deadly secret is still active, and the peace we enjoy is nothing more than the pause between the silence of the ocean and the sound of the ice breaking from below.